Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card. Today I'm using the Stampin' Up set called From the Herd. It is so cute with these animals and the big eyes. It's got some great sentiments just looking in on you. It's past your birthday, from the herd. Anyway, great set. So I'm going to start with some Spellbinders dies. I'm going to take the second one in from the outside. It's just a square, and I've got a 3 3/8 inch wide piece of Ranger watercolor paper. I'm going to center this square at the top, and then I'm going to take my pencil and I'm just going to draw a line on the inside. I want this to look like a Polaroid picture. So I'm just creating a guide for my watercolor. Now I'm using this tape. It's paper tape, surgical tape, micropore tape. I get it at Amazon, and I use this stuff for pretty much everything. You'll see me using it for a bunch of different things in the video today. And I'm just going to adhere it. I'm using it as a mask here. I'm going to mask this square that I've drawn, and I'm going to adhere the tape just to the outside of the pencil so that I can go in and erase those pencil marks. Because sometimes when you put ink down on paper, if there's pencil underneath it, you can't erase it once you put the ink on. So I've put the tape right on the edge so that there's enough space for me to erase that pencil. Alright, once I get that done, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my image. Now I did not want the bird to be on the outside. I'm going to save him for the inside. So I'm taking my tape again, my surgical tape, and I'm going to mask off, or just cover up really, the bird on the stamp. And I'm going to put a couple of layers on here, and you can cut the tape and it sticks really well. And then I'm going to ink it up with some VersaFine black onyx ink. And the nice thing is this tape, if I get some ink on it, it's not going to seep through, which sometimes a Post-it can do. Now I'm going to stamp this right in the center so all eyes are visible, and press it down really hard. And I'm going to go ahead and clear emboss this. I like to do that when I watercolor because it really helps me stay in the lines. So I've just got some clear embossing powder. I'm going to heat it to set it, and then I'll be ready to watercolor. And notice that the tape is fine with the heat gun. You don't have to worry about that. Alright, so I'm going to start off with my pig, and I'm going to use some distress markers for coloring, and I'm going to put some on my acrylic block. For my pig, I'm using spun sugar and Victorian velvet. The first thing I'm going to do each time is cover my animal with water. And what that's going to do is prepare my cardstock for color. You know, sometimes if you start coloring with watercolor, and then by the time you go get some more ink on your brush, it's dried already and created a water stain that's really hard to get out. Well, to avoid that, all you really have to do is cover your cardstock in water first before you apply your first color, and then the colors will blend really well. Now notice that I'm putting in, basically I'm kind of coloring this like I would with Copic markers, which is coloring the whole thing in sections with the lighter color first, and then I'll go in with my darker color and color into the shadow areas. Now I spent quite a bit of time on this pig. I'm not sure why. It just wasn't looking exactly the way I wanted. So you'll have to be patient here while I finish him up. The other animals don't take quite as much time. And you can use the ink pads. It's the same thing. I just find it easier to use on the acrylic block. The markers are really easy to put on there. And notice that I'm putting multiple layers too. So it dries pretty quickly. So if it's not as dark as I like in the shadow areas, I'm going back in there with some more of my darker color and putting it on top, and that'll make it even darker. And then I'm going back and adding a little bit more pink because I wanted him to be pinker. And I'm keeping all of their eyes white. Now in between animals, I'm just going to wipe my block with a baby wipe, and I'll flip it over, make sure there's no moisture on it. And I'll start with my new set of colors. For the llama, I'm going to be using frayed burlap and antique linen. And I forgot to cover them in water first. I know I just told you to do that. So when I realized that, I just had some antique linen on my brush. So I went ahead and just kind of kept going with it. And once the ink was gone, I just kept going with the water until I covered everything. And then I'm going to take my antique linen again and go back and color in the rest of him. And then I'll take the frayed burlap and color the shadow areas. And also notice that I've been working in sections, kind of like when I'm doing my flowers. I always do it one petal at a time. And I find that it makes it a lot more manageable to just take it piece by piece slowly. And then also the cardstock isn't drying when you're trying to apply the different colors if you do it in small sections. So I'm just going to speed this up a little bit. Now for my goat, I'm actually combining two colors. I'm not using a light and a dark. I'm using weathered wood and pumice stone. Pumice stone is kind of a dark gray, and weathered wood is a bluish gray. It's actually quite a bit blue. So I'm combining those two together to get more of a bluish gray for my goat. And then I can take more of the pumice stone, which is a little bit darker, to put into the shadow areas. For the chicken, I'm using scattered straw and wild honey. I'm going to color the right hand side in the light color and then the wild honey on his wing. And for his feathers that are around his head and the tail, I did the edges in wild honey. And then I went back in with some scattered straw and carried that, kind of blended that wild honey toward the center. And I have a tissue off to the side. It's hard to see. I don't know if you saw that, but whenever my brush gets a little bit too much color on it, which does happen, then I just wipe it off on a tissue and I start over. Now for the buffalo, I'm going to color again the whole thing in just water. And I'm taking this is Vintage Photo and tea dye, and I'm combining these two colors together to get this kind of cool brownish reddish color. And I'm using the Vintage Photo, which is a little bit darker in the shadow areas. Now because I'm doing this section by section, I have to be careful when I'm combining colors to make sure that I'm consistent so that I get the same shade for each section. Now for the part on top of his head, I wanted it to be a different color. So I'm adding some fired brick. That's what I just added to my block here. So I'm doing mostly tea dye and fired brick, but I'm also going to go back and add in some of that Vintage Photo. So this is a great way to get a new color that matches a color you already have by just adding another color to it. So it matches, it complements it, but it's not the same color. Now I just decided to wipe my block off because I was using so much and it was getting a lot of water on it. So I just cleaned it off and I put the same colors on there. Now for his face, I wanted a couple of different shades. So for underneath his nose, I'm going to make it a little bit darker by adding more of the Vintage Photo. And then on top of his nose, I made it a little bit lighter by having more of the tea dye and just more water. For the horns, I'm going to do them all in antique linen. Nothing really special about that. And then for the hoofs, I'm just using some black soot, just a tiny little bit, and mostly water. So it's kind of coming out like a gray color. For this little lock on the goat, I use faded jeans, just a blue color. And now I'm going to work on my grass. So I've got mowed lawn and peeled paint. Mowed lawn is on the bottom. And for this, I colored it all with water. I keep saying colored with water, but I just covered it with water is really what I'm saying. And for this, what I did was I just kind of, sometimes I'll pull both colors at the same time and color it down. Sometimes I pull just some peeled paint, sometimes just some mowed lawn. I didn't want it to be very consistent. I wanted the colors to kind of vary without really a pattern. Where those tufts of grass are is where I tended to use more of the peeled paint because it was more of a lighter color, more of a darker color. And I'm going to carry this green all the way out to the edge. Now for my sky, I'm using broken china and tumbled glass. And I covered the whole thing with quite a bit of water, and I'm going in there mostly dotting my brush because I've got a lot of water with a combination of these two colors. And again, doing it section by section. And then carrying it out all the way to the edge. Now I'm just filling in some of the areas I missed. Now I wanted it to be a little darker on the edges, so I added more color, and then here's where I made kind of my mistake, is I colored it and I just put more water right on the edge with some color and I left it, and you'll see what happens in a minute. So I'm going back to add a little bit more detail. This is ripe persimmon, which is just the beak of the chicken nose, and this is worn lipstick on the mouth of the llama and also on the nose of the goat, which I ended up putting a little bit more weathered wood on there just to so it wouldn't be quite so pink. All right, now I have a freeze frame here so you can see how my sky dried. There's a water line at the very top, so that looks terrible. I'm gonna have to get rid of that. So what I'm gonna do is actually just go in with some water. I'm just gonna dab it, dab it, dab it, wet it up, reactivate the ink, and get rid of that line. And I ended up taking a little bit more of the tumbled glass, which is a very, very light blue, and dabbing it on that line and kind of bringing my water line down just a little bit. So the nice thing about the distress inks and using watercolor paper is that you can reactivate the ink, reblend it. As long as, I find it's harder with when you take the markers directly to the paper to get it to blend, which is why I'm putting the markers on this block and then applying it with an aqua painter. All right, now it's time to remove the tape, and I just love the way this turned out. They're just so adorable. Alright, now I'm going to stamp my sentiment, just some VersaFine black onyx ink, my favorite ink for clear stamps. And then I decided to make my own garland. So I'm going to cut a piece of linen thread by Stampin' Up. It's kind of a distressed thread. And I'm going to take my tape again, and this is what I use my tape for, is holding things down. So I'm holding down my thread on my craft sheet. And the nice thing about this tape is that it sticks to my craft mat. The Post-its don't stick very well to my craft mat. Anyway, I've got some scratch pieces of black cardstock and this confetti, this heart confetti punch by Stampin' Up, which just punches a bunch of different size hearts. It's really cute. And I've got my matte medium, which can be used as an adhesive, but it's also used as like a gel or emulsifier for different kinds of art materials. But I'm going to dab it a little bit on my linen thread, and then I'll use my pick-me-up stick to pick up one of the hearts and place it on top. So then I'll put another dot, and I'll take a different size heart and kind of squish it down into my linen thread. And I'm going to space them out the same and just vary the size that I pick up to make it a little random. I'm going to keep doing that until I have enough hearts to where I think I'm going to cover that corner area. I'm going to set that off to dry. I'll stamp the inside, hope it was great. And then I want the bird on the inside now, so I'm going to mask around him again with my tape. And it's really kind of hard because he was kind of half on the buffalo. So I'm going to do my best here, and once I ink it up, I can take my tape off, and what I did was take a Stampin' Up marker. You can color stamps with Stampin' Up markers. So I colored his feet with a black marker. And I'm going to stamp it down here in the corner. And it didn't come out perfect, but it was good enough for me, which means it must be pretty good. And I went ahead and finished off any missing pieces on his feet with a marker. Now I stamped the balloon, which also comes with the set. And then that's Memento. And then I stamped it again on watercolor paper with the VersaFine black that I used in the initial herd stamp. And then clear embossed that. Heat it to set it because I want to watercolor this. So what I decided, I didn't want to color marker to paper directly because this is Nina, a Solar White cardstock for my card base. So I'm using a blender pen. A blender pen allows you to pick up the ink just a little bit, so it gives a lighter shade. This is squeezed lemonade and wild honey. And this is spice marmalade. So you can wipe it off on a piece of paper in between colors, and it'll grab just enough color, especially for small areas. It's great. So here I am wiping it off in between my colors. For his shadow, I didn't want him to be kind of floating in the air, so I put a little bit of C4 and then I blended it out with some C1. Now for my balloon, I'm going to use picked raspberry and worn lipstick, covering the whole thing mostly in worn lipstick and then going into the shadow areas with my picked raspberry, and definitely keeping a lot of that very light because the picked raspberry is not too dark and I really wanted it to look like a shadow. Cut that out, and I used just a small tape runner. I didn't want to pop it up on the inside since it's on the inside, so I just put some tape runner on it and adhered it. Now this is some pattern paper by Averiel. It's called their Brights collection. It coordinates with their ink pads, and I love this pattern paper. It's got stripes and dots and hearts, and I just love it. It's very basic. So I'm going to adhere my photo to a piece of this cardstock, and then I'll adhere this piece to my card base. I'm just using my ATG gun, and when I adhere it, I'm going to slant it a little bit, just to create a little interest. And now it's time to put my garland on, so I'm going to take my 2-way glue pen, and I'm just going to keep pressing down in dots until I get the whole thing covered. I love this glue pen because you can really be precise about where you put your glue. And so I'm just going to drape it around the corner, and I'm going to press it down on all the hearts, and it sticks great. And then I'm not going to mess with wrapping it around. I decided I was just going to trim it off right at the edge because it's covering the card base. And then I'm going to take my glue pen and just add a little dot of glue to each end to make sure it doesn't fray. And that's it. So it's kind of a long process to do this card, but it looks so cute, and it was really fun watercoloring. So anyway, I hope you liked it, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.